there has been a long running joke of everyone asking operator, well, but do you have anything we could sell?
Yeah.
You know, because our projects were always the most expensive to activate, but then there was no way to recoup that money. So everyone asking us, like, can operator make flat art? Some can
Yes.
be in a collector's home. And so we were fighting tooth and nail. We're like, no, we'll only take commissions from institutions or brands who will be fine can work without the product placed in it, which is a really tough sell.
That was Ania and Dejha from Operator. My name's Eli Scheinman, and this is Proof Artist Profiles. I had a wonderful discussion with Operator. We talked about a variety of topics. We spoke about privacy. We talked about surveillance, choreography, generative art. We went deep across all of these dimensions and the way that they bring these different parts of their practice into the creation of really exceptional artwork, things that engage the audience in a participatory way. And they're now bridging that to a project with Art Blocks that releases tomorrow. I could not be more excited to share this conversation. Please enjoy. Welcome, Ania and Dejha. It's such a pleasure to have you both on the show. Ania, we had the pleasure of meeting in Tokyo recently, and so fun to follow up just a week later or so and do this conversation, have this talk. Can you tell us, for those who don't know about both of you, a little about your backgrounds? Would be fascinating as a start.
Yeah, so my name is Ania Catherine, and prior to working with Dejha with Operator, I was a choreographer, performance artist, mostly work human body as a medium.
And I'm Dejha. My background is human-computer interaction. I'm a technologist and also an immersive artist. And Ania and I, we met in 2016 on Instagram to work together, but then we fell in love, and then we got married and we worked together. So not only is our practice immersive in the medium, but also in the nature. So this has been going on now for 7 years. But together, creative technology, performance art, and large-scale environments to create experiential artworks.
Oh, it's fascinating. And I love the multiple layers of your collaboration and partnership. If you're okay with it, can we go back even a little further for both of you? Where did the sort of technologist come from? Where did that start? Where did the creation and the artist in you start? Were these really early moments in your childhood? Was it sort of the conditions in which you grew up and your parents? Was it school? Where did some of the things you're doing now really originate and start, if you had to go way back?
If I had to go way back, my grandmother put me in painting and drawing classes when I was quite young. And so she was stuffing me with art supplies, I think because she wanted to be an artist herself. And so I was receiving the secondhand benefit of her not becoming that in her lifetime. And so as a consequence, I was in art classes, mostly traditional art classes growing up, but I'm an only child, which meant I spent a lot of time by myself. So I would lock myself in my room. And I remember I had these Tyco video cameras that were tethered to the VHS player. And I was, making art on the computer and printing it out and drawing and creating these and using two deck VHS receivers to edit them. And so I spent time experimenting with making art without even really knowing that's what I was doing. Then in 2004, I went to the University of the Arts where I got a BFA in multimedia. And my introduction the first year was looking at the history of computer art through the lens of Black Mountain College, experiments of art and technology. I think my first coding book was a processing book, a bunch of JavaScript books. And it was really the program that I studied within was really focusing on not heroing the technology because the technology, it moves so fast, and heroing the concept is conceptual rigor is more important. So studying the interaction of human and computers, also audience as participant, thinking back to Fluxus and Happenings and Alan Capro, where it's a participatory art making process and final artwork.
And Ania?
Not many people go that far back, so I love that. It is such a good story.
Yeah.
And also, I just fast forwarding to you, like live triggering visuals for ASAP Rocky, and I'm like, this actually started with her and her like Tyco cameras in her room as an only child.
Yes, I did skip that one chapter.
Yeah.
I had a whole career of projection mapping.
And, fascinating.
Large-scale fabricated environments, and a lot of tech using it in a way that it wasn't supposed to be used. So like a month later, everything would break, but it was fine for the live show. And now I'm fully allergic to screens and video. So after many years of projection map, kind of pivoted away from screens as much as possible. But now for you, your background.
So I had a lot of energy as a child. And I think my parents were like, what do we do with this kid? So they put me in dance class. It was a very good idea because I had a lot of excess energy. So I think a lot of people kind of use dance as a babysitting for their kids. And so I remember a lot of kids being kind of goofy. And I was always serious about it. Like I had this feeling during class that I was like so important, like really listening to all the info. And I remember even looking at pictures of myself when I'm 5 dancing, like in my poses, I'm like I think I'm like royal. Like there's something very early on that I felt was super important about dancing. So that's really where I started as I grew up, trained in dance. I studied dance in college. Then at a certain point, I got a little bit tired of being taught how to move. And I decided to go on a period of unlearning where I kind of was like, how do I move? Like what kind of movement comes out of me versus what kind of movement am I being taught to perform? And so that was a lot of improvisation and more experimental work, site-specific work, making dance films, getting into performance. And so that's what I was doing. And then I did a master's in gender and public policy from the London School of Economics because I was kind of on the side. My other parallel life was women's rights. So then at a certain point, those two worlds kind of collided. And I was like, how can I, use the human body, performance and art and movement to drive conversations around gender and around liberating everyone in the body to see possibilities and not limitations. So that's kind of what I was doing before I met Dejha.
Yeah. Okay. So your collaboration now makes so much more sense given a better understanding of your respective backgrounds and how those maybe come together. Let's talk for a moment about your project Line Scanner, which I think was perhaps your first sort of formalized collaboration. Can you talk us through that a little bit? We're going to look at it on the screen at the same time.
Line Scanner, as I was just saying, I was coming out of a long, several years of working within building projection mapping systems and immersive environments. And it was kind of, I think, the most obvious collaboration that I just needed to get out of the way.
Projection, choreography.
Like, I'll project and you dance, and we'll never come back to this, and let's just get it over with.
That's like any new relationship. Start with the comfort zone.
The comfort zone.
And so the way that we created this process, we shot this in LA. So everything you're watching here is content, right? So what I mean by that is we shot this at Optimus Studios. Near the airport, near LAX, and it's in a big hangar, and so we had a lift that was rigging I would say probably a 300-pound projector going straight down, and Ania was laying on the ground right below it.
We had a very trusting relationship very early on.
Yeah. And so we were projecting straight down on Ania, and I was live triggering animations that I had created, and Ania was improvising, and then we edited together a formalized film to create the final product.
And where was that ultimately shown? I mean, was it strictly digital, or was there some instantiation of this ultimately in a physical space as well?
The screened at Sika Museum in Korea and other exhibitions of new media art, but this piece, like plus the animations, was not performed live, but the film kind of traveled and was exhibited.
Yes.
Yeah. And this is we'll probably come back to this theme a few times, but is displaying your work in sort of more traditional art institutions and spaces, there's sort of some self-evident reasons why that might be interesting, but for you guys, why is that maybe a good space to display some of your work? Are there other more unsuspecting spaces that you think are interesting in their own ways? Would just love to hear how you think about the exhibition, the display of your work.
I mean, as experiential artists, I feel like the display of our work is not secondary. It's the display of the work, the experience of the work. So even when it comes to production, like when we have a project, like operator per own works, if we did, which we'll talk about on View in a bit, but when we did on View, like we had to produce that because the museum wasn't equipped to subfloors and like hundreds of feet of fiber optics running and like sensors. So we're always producing our own work, and it's really important. Yeah. And I think that being in institutions, at least from my perspective, being in institutions is important. And I think because early on, we were never able to create in an art context, and our medium was quite expensive. So most of our early work, the only places that it could be displayed or was invited to be displayed were more it would be like brand activation. So we are trying to make art, but we are only able to do that in the context of like experiential marketing or brand collaborations. We were trying to make art, but the only way we could do it was with, a brand. And so we are always kind of in that side thing of like, is it really art? Is it conceptual art? Is it contemporary art? And we were like, yes. So it's nice to finally see that more traditional art institutions and the contemporary art world is way more open to art made with advanced technology and doesn't kind of write it off as spectacle or entertainment, but sees the conceptual that can exist inside a piece that uses advantages.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. You touched on it, Ania, on View. I'd love to spend a moment talking about that. Would it be fair to say that that was your first collaborative project or work that really explored these themes of surveillance and privacy? Would that be accurate to say? And then can you maybe talk us through that one a little bit?
Yes, 100%. So in 2019, we created and displayed a work commissioned by the SCAD Museum called On View. And this was really, I think it's actually interesting to describe and share how we got commissioned by the SCAD Museum. Because we were commissioned by Adidas to create a piece called Off Is On. And it is an experiential artwork that it was duration, but we ran it, for 3 days over and over and over for about 6 or 7 hours a day. A performance installation with shadow play and architecture and live performance and music. And friend Kiran, Madam Gandhi, she came to the performance and she put it on her IG Live. And then 2 days later, we got hit up by the head curator of the SCAD Museum of Art and said, "We want to bring experiential art to our museum. Can we commission the work?" And so it's interesting that was the bridge of how we arrived to you. And at the same time, because our work is experiential and it becomes easily an Instagram backdrop, or it could be seen as that way, we would have brands reach out to us all the time and say, well, can you make art for us for this brand, but could you also make it Instagrammable and like good for selfies? Sorry to say that, but could you? And so we were frustrated by this because we're like, our medium isn't a selfie backdrop, and
Yes.
you're co-opting it and making it that.
I
And
was
so
just going to ask you whether you felt good about that co-opting, and like that this was a commentary sort of more broadly on the social engagement with your work, or if you had some other feelings about it.
we had other feelings.
Mixed.
I mean, of course, but I would say where On View comes into the conversation, because it tells you exactly how we feel about it, which is essentially what we did, what On View is a 3-phase experiential artwork, about 80 by 20 feet. So it's a large scale footprint, and it takes about 30 minutes to go through. And when you go through, you kind of quickly realize it's more of a theoretical parallel to the selfie stage. In a way, we kind of built a selfie stage that was commenting on selfie stages. But while we were creating this project, we intended to look at the co-opting of the rich history of performance and installation art. Yayoi Kusama, for instance, we see quite a bit of experiential marketing ripping her work. And we wanted to speak on that, how the experience to see art, asking the question, are you going to see what's on view, or are you going to see yourself on view? And putting your arm to the back and using it as a selfie backdrop. And so in that, we realize Instagram and media play a huge role in that phenomenon, right? And we kind of slowly, accidentally landed in surveillance capitalism, because we're like, well, why is this? Why is this the case? What is the value of art in experiential marketing and brand engagement and social media? And so in that, we ended up creating a piece not just about art engagement and selfie stages, but then surveillance capitalism and extractive technologies.
And that's really become a primary through line through much of your work since then. Would that be fair to say? Yeah.
Yes, primarily in its different manifestations and contexts. Yes.
So maybe Ania, can you walk us through a little bit the what you guys call the privacy collection, which reflects that focus on those thematic areas, but includes a number of very probably connected but still disparate projects and works. Can you talk us through a couple of those?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, should we start with I'd Rather Be in a Dark Silence?
Yeah, let's start with that. So that won the Lumen Prize in 2021?
21, yes. Yeah, it did. So this work, so out of On View, we kind of felt like, okay, we made this artwork and it was like, it's a little bit grim what's going on. And we were like, what happens to the person who went through On View, has this realization of like things tracking them? How did that person find agency? How do they find some way to fight back? But as we are artists, and I think we're not trying to create solutions, but we wanted to also think through some ideas that could represent agency of people living in these systems. And so we came up with the idea of the signal blocking trench coat, which is called I'd Rather Be in a Dark Silence Then. So in this piece, any device that's put inside the dark pocket is completely offline. So you can't be traced, hacked, monitored. So it's kind of a counter surveillance fashion piece, conceptual artwork. It does have a function, but we're not also recommending that everyone goes and wears signal blocking garments. Like, this is not the solution to the problem, but it's a piece that can start a conversation about why that coat would even need to exist. It says something about the context that we live in. But when we displayed this coat in a group show in Rome in 2020, people were very confused about why there was a trench coat in a digital art exhibition. So we decided to use our native medium of experiential art to translate what the coat did and display that in an immersive installation. So that's the footage that you're seeing now, is from that installation where we translated the capability of the coat into a space. We had art photography, a filter, performance, short film, poetry, sound score, everything for one cohesive experience.
So by this time, you guys are getting out of your comfort zones, perhaps, or expanding those comfort zones across multiple dimensions, it seems. At this moment in 2020, 2021, are you exploring blockchain, crypto sort of adjacent things to privacy and surveillance, or not yet?
So at this time, and after we completed On View, we wanted to speak project, and pretty much the only people who said yes to us being able to speak about the project were Christie's Art and Tech Summit in Hong Kong and the crypto art folks. So everyone else was like, we don't know if this is art yet, but we found ourselves at the very first cutoff in 2019 speaking about On View, a project that didn't use blockchain, while Tyler Hobbs, Dimitri Cherniak, Kevin Abosh, and the CryptoPunks were displayed on the basement. And we're on the top floor talking about this installation. So that was the night like a Winklevoss twin bought a punk. And we just happened to be kind of thrown in this world with all the early crypto art people.
Yeah.
So we loved that community was the only community that was welcoming for artists working with technology and weren't like suspicious of medium. So we were kind of adjacent and like floating in that circle for many years, but also trying to figure out the best way to incorporate blockchain into what we were doing and into our mediums that felt really native and unique to what we do, which are incorporating performance in the body and space and environment. So it took us a minute to figure out how to best it without just being like, let's mint pictures of our installations.
Yeah.
We wanted to do something better than that.
And I think we'll come back to the connection between blockchain and privacy, because there are these, or maybe we talk about it now. There sort of are these interesting dimensions of transparency and privacy on chain that I think is probably emerging or present in some of your work. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So after we left I'd Rather Be in a Dark Silence, then we decided to create the Privacy Collection. And the Privacy Collection is looking at how privacy functions in blockchain technology. So more through a Web3 lens rather than a Web2 lens. And the core thesis is looking at the tension between privacy and transparency, right? And so that's why you'll see, even in what you're looking at now, the use of glass materials and transparent materials, the human body, the idea of hiding in plain sight on chain. Being known for being unknown, trying to express oneself and move. And so each lot of the Privacy Collection, which started in February 2022. So after we completed I'd Rather Be in a Dark Silence, then we began the Privacy Collection. And the Privacy Collection is looking at how privacy functions in more of a Web3 context. So these projects were looking at privacy through a Web2 context. We were really looking at the underlying thesis of how privacy, the tension between privacy and transparency in blockchain technology.
So I'm curious, before the Privacy Collection, it sounds like the work was your work was manifesting in two primary ways. So through institutions as experiential art installations, but then also perhaps sort of doing some so-called agency or brand work on the sort of more commodification side of things. Is it true that until the Privacy Collection and crypto and blockchain, that you were not explicitly selling these works in any form? And if so, I'm curious how being able to capture these moments, capture these experiences on chain sort of changed your relationship to the work, or has changed your lives in different ways. I would just be curious to hear how that's sort of manifested and altered your relationship with your work.
Yeah, I mean, our friends and our families would laugh at us. They're like, did you really have to choose the two mediums to work in that you literally cannot sell and are also very good to make? We're like, we want to make the most expensive type of work possible to sell. Everyone's like, I don't know what's wrong with you two. So yeah, to live on commissions and then quietly white label projects using our skills in order to, pay to have the ridiculous gold floor that we wanted in our museum installation by doing corporate work on the side. That's how we were, trying to push forward our career. So I think it definitely changed when we figured out to incorporate blockchain and have something to be able to sell that didn't feel like we're completely changing our medium or doing something kind of lazy. Because if someone owns an artwork by us, we don't want it to be like a result takeaway from something, but really have a meaningful tie and have it be something that we're proud to have people say is an artwork and was created to be consumed and owned in the way that it was made. That changed a lot.
But there was, I just, okay.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to add, there has been a long running joke of everyone asking operator, well, but do you have anything we could sell?
Yeah.
You know, because our projects were always the most expensive to activate, but then there was no way to recoup that money. So everyone asking us, like, can operator make flat art?
Yes.
Some can be in the collector's home. And so we were fighting tooth and nail. We're like, no, we'll only take commissions from institutions or brands who will be fine can work without the product placed in it, which is a really tough sell, you know. And it actually happened with Off Is On, where the performers at a shoe launch were barefoot. So we won that one. And I think it worked out okay. But yes, so the privacy collection marked the first time in our 7-year practice that we sold a work.
And sort of last question on that that theme. How does that change the creation process when you know that something is that is maybe inherently experiential will also have this other form? And it sounds like the latter, the other form, the tokenized form, doesn't come as an afterthought or later in the process. So I'm curious, how does it inform from the very beginning something that is otherwise very experiential?
In every work that Ania and I create, there is an audience participant. I would say 90% of the works that we create. And because of that, the human body and the human experience is at the creation of the work. And so when we think about the role of a collector in one of our artworks, we think of them as an audience participant. And because of that, it really shapes the structure of the work. And for us, there is what blockchain technology affords experiential art is an experiential interface where we with duration in longer formats than we could without it. Meaning the fact that we can be bound to a collector through a token who can then transfer that token to another collector means that we can hold a connection with them without losing it. And so that, for instance, like an artwork that we created, Let Me Check with the Wife, where we implemented a secondary token that's attached via the owner of function to the primary super rare token. We employ a sense of reverse utility, where the collector had to provide utility to us every year on our wedding anniversary, July 9th. You know, and so this just wouldn't be possible.
It is.
It's coming up. So that just wouldn't be possible, you know, without this technology, right?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I'd love to shift just briefly to your project Unsigned, which in some ways explores those dimensions that we were just talking about with your relationship with collectors and the role of collector more broadly in these dynamics of artist and purveyor or appreciator. I don't know, there's some good nomenclature there, but on the other side of the art, the participant and as we've been talking about, in this case, the collector. And can you talk to us a little bit about Unsigned? It's sort of, would it be fair to say a different form of work from you, but very conceptual in nature, as is much of your work. Can you tell us a little bit about this one? I think in terms of impact, was a really important piece of work and body of work.
Thank you. Yeah, I think Unsigned is consistent with our past work in the sense that it's a conceptual artwork. What's different about it mostly is that there was the idea, and this is a collaboration with Annika Meyer. So we had the idea to do this on a Friday night, and the next Saturday we minted the first 4 signatures.
Wow.
So in that sense, it's like a very like responding to this finding by Dr. Helen Gorel that when a man signs their artwork, the value goes up. But when a woman artist signs their artwork, the value goes down. So a signed artwork by a woman artist is actually worth less than an unsigned version, which to us it was just a unpleasant like realization of like, wow, we're in 2023 and this is still the case. What we were thinking is now that we were kind of getting deeper into the web art space, we're like, well, what if we are able to prove the value of the signature by itself as an object? So then the logic would follow that if there's an artwork that is signed, then if the signature alone is worth X amount of money, then if it was applied to an artwork, it would make it more valuable. So we're kind of raising the conceptual and literal value of the signatures of women and non-binary artists by selling them as NFTs. And the response to this was really fantastic. And many of the artists that we reached out to, we just asked, would you be interested? Here's what we're doing. And a lot of them responded with, I was just told last week by a gallery that no collectors wanted to buy my work because they think I'm going to have a kid and stop making art. And so like we just thought these stories were like pouring out from artists that let us know, and that we don't realize the ways that a lot of this, you know, what feels like old school gender bias is still seeping into Web3, which is trying or claiming to be so much better.
Right.
So that's what the collection is doing, and it started a big conversation. So we're really proud of it.
And do you think, I mean, part of the promise of this space is that you could be anon, that your gender could be unknown or fluid or otherwise. Do you think that is there still an opportunity for gender bias to be less of a thing because there is that opportunity to be anon or otherwise? Or is that not an ideal outcome where a female artist is anon for the reasons you're exploring in Unsigned?
Exactly. That's what I think. I don't feel like anonymity should be a luxury only able to be afforded by men as a conceptual choice, and for women on non-binary people for that their gender makes them less valuable. So I think I a way for Web3 to do better and be better than the traditional art world. And I just hope that projects like Unsigned and others can kind of like push every level up and actually be the change, and, you know, not just focus on decentralization, but other values that we want to have in the space, make it, I don't know, a superior world that we're working towards building.
Yeah, well said. Okay, so let's transition now to something that's incredibly exciting, which is your release, Human Unreadable, which drops tomorrow on Art Blocks. This is a collection of 400 pieces. Let's dig into it. How did that project come to be? I know it's been something like 9 months in the making. I've heard you, I think, describe this work as sort of computational choreography. Either of you would just love to sort of have you walk us through the project inception and those 9 months of process and work, and then ultimately what people will experience when they mint tomorrow.
Yeah, so Human Unreadable is part of the privacy collection, which, as Dejha mentioned earlier, looks at the tension between privacy and transparency in blockchain technology. So each of the lots is exploring that subject, and also each of these lots is super focused on the human body, which we felt as we entered into Web3 was lacking.
The privacy lot in the privacy collection is site specific to crypto culture, right? And so like the privacy portraits were responding to PFPs, for instance. Human Unreadable is responding to the site that is long form generative art. So that was a conceptual choice to even have it on Art Blocks. The project, we met actually Eric in almost 1 year ago at NFIC, and we were talking about performance and bringing a more fleshy approach to blockchain art. And it's a challenge, and for us, we wanted to create a generative artwork that had the body at the center of it, and so we discussed the idea with Eric that what if we created a generative choreography method. And so what we've done in the 9-month making was first and foremost creating an on-chain generative choreography method that then could drive the final visual out, but also drive the output of choreographic sequences that could be performed live. And so Human Unreadable is an artwork that reveals in 3 acts, right? So the beginning of the artwork is the reveal on Art Blocks and the mint on Art Blocks. And it ends in a live performance in an art institution. Middle ground, the second act, which is the uncovering of the choreography that created and drove all the visual parameters of the work that you on Art Blocks.
Yeah, fascinating, and thank you for taking us through that. I'm curious, you alluded to this. In this case, the sort of site specific nature is that it's long form generative. Why is that? Let's call it a site. Why is that site interesting to the two of you?
I think when we think of site and when we are thinking about why privacy portraits, which are responding to PFPs, which is the phenomenon of people wanting to represent themselves in something other than their face, which is very different than Web 2, which is focused on the face and the selfie, and suddenly people want to be represented by something else. So that was kind of a phenomenon that as artists, just looking at how this technology is creating certain cultures and pushing forward certain kinds of art that show up in order to kind of meet people's needs in this new sphere. So that's kind of privacy portraits responding to PFPs as a phenomenon. We also feel like long form on-chain generative art is a phenomenon, and the power that it's gotten and the kind of traction and the conversations and the way that it's also led to many people now diving back to the early generative art of the 60s and people who were totally forgotten now becoming huge and having, you know, exhibitions, because this movement now made people appreciate the roots that happened 60 years ago. So I think it really had a powerful movement and kind of became a phenomenon, the popularity of it. So we were kind of thinking we should reflect on the intensity of what's happening right now with this medium and jump into the conversation with kind of our take.
Yeah, well, and well done, because from my own perspective, but also many of the collectors I admire the most, there's sort of great agreement that your take on long form generative is some of the most interesting and important that we've seen, frankly. So both from a conceptual level, but also the final output of the work, the multiple layers of the sort of 3 dimensions across which the work exists ultimately. So cannot wait for tomorrow and the mint. I wanted to close with a couple sort of broader questions, if you're okay with it. First, let's start with, is there anyone, and I always find this fascinating, I do some curation and I'm always thinking about sort of who is doing interesting things conceptually that I may not be aware of or otherwise. Are there any artists that come to mind for both or either of you that you might want to shine a light on and highlight that you're finding especially interesting right now?
I would highlight Lauren Lee McCarthy, who is also the inventor of P5JS.
And an LA native.
Yes.
And an LA native, which I always like to remind people that she invented P5JS because it is the framework in which most Art Blocks works are created. I think it's just important to acknowledge that.
Yes. I am so aligned on that one and in so much agreement. I think Laura, for those who are watching from the collector side, I think Laura has a couple NFTs. She's released a few things, but just more broadly, to your point, the recognition of her contributions, I think, are increasingly important. I'd love to have her on the podcast, actually, and talk about that background. Ania, anyone jump out for you?
Yeah, so one of my favorite artists for the past several years, who is also a dear friend, but that I just feel like is one of the most important artists of this century, is Evelyn Benchikova. She's also a Berlin-based artist, and she has minted a few pieces recently, but she just has such a beautiful, timeless vision, really conceptual approach, poetic use of technology, and everything that comes out of her I adore. So I have to call her out.
I love it. That's one for me to look into. I don't know the name, so I appreciate that. Then I get to discover someone new as well. And last question, what can we expect from the two of you moving forward? What do you think is sort of coming down the pipeline? What themes, mediums, spaces, sites are interesting, over some period of, let's call it, the months and years ahead?
Well, there will be more lots of the privacy collection. And as we started the privacy collection in a very sort of familiar way with 3D assets and then video, and then slowly getting weirder and weirder and pulling art out of the screen.
I want more weird.
Yeah, we're going.
Outstanding. And just to wrap up, moving forward, will you guys mint exclusively on ETH? I know you've done ETH, you've done Tezos. Do you have strong perspectives, or do you sort of like both for separate reasons?
I have a strong perspective.
Oh, go.
My strong perspective is it depends on what the work needs.
Sure.
I think there's like realities, of course.
Yeah.
Where for instance, Unsigned made sense happen on Tezos 100%. And I think from a technology perspective, sometimes it makes more sense on Ethereum. And I think we don't have any one allegiance, but we consider the context both conceptually and technically and what the project needs.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a thoughtful, nuanced perspective, as I would expect from the two of you. Well, it's been so great to spend a little time together. I know it's late your time on a Friday, so appreciate it. I will be minting tomorrow, and just good luck, and excited to see the collection and the mints come to life. Cannot wait.
Well, thank you, Eli and Proof, for your time. It's been super nice.
A pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right, that is it for this episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you would like to help us out, head on over to proof.xyz and click on the reviews button at the very top and leave us a 5-star review. Thanks so much. Take care.